I already gave Mom and Dad a luxury wellness resort. David said it right there, in the middle of our 40-year wedding anniversary dinner at an upscale restaurant in Chicago. I dropped my fork onto the floor, because for the past 3 years, I was still working night shifts, and my wife was living with constant joint pain in a damp rental apartment. Before I could even understand what was happening, my daughter-in-law set her wine glass down and said calmly, almost casually, "People like you don't deserve it." Before I go on, if you're hearing this story anywhere, take a moment to leave a comment below and subscribe so you don't miss other family stories like this. Your presence here gives me a reason to keep talking. And trust me, what happened after that dinner was not just a careless remark. I bent down to pick up the fork. My hand trembled, just a little. No one noticed. In that brightly lit room, people kept smiling, raising their glasses, talking about trips and big contracts. I looked around and wondered how Susan and I had ended up there, wearing the oldest clothes we owned, pressed flat the night before, out of habit. A habit built on saving every dollar. The steakhouse sat in the heart of Chicago, where winter wind slips through every street corner. I knew the price of a single chair in that place could equal a full week of our rent. Susan sat beside me, her back slightly hunched. She wore the dark blue dress she'd worn to every important occasion for the past 10 years. I saw her gently rub her knee under the table, quickly like she didn't want anyone to see. David stood up. My son looked nothing like I did at his age. A tailored suit, polished shoes, a confident voice. When he raised his glass to toast, the whole table went quiet. I thought it would be the usual words. "Thank you for your sacrifices. Sorry I don't visit enough." But instead, he talked about the resort, about warm mineral lakes, about treatment programs he said he had paid for in full 3 years ago. I looked at Susan. She looked back at me. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew we had never set foot in that place. I didn't know how to react. In my mind, I saw knights standing guard in a dark parking lot, the heels of my security shoes worn thin. Mornings when Susan forced herself out of bed without making a sound. I remembered last year's hospital bill, a number longer than we could bear. We never told David. I thought he was busy. I thought I should stay quiet. That silence broke when David turned toward us, smiling, waiting for a thank you. I'm not good at speaking in front of people. I only told the truth in a low voice, just loud enough for those closest to hear. I said we were still living in the old apartment, that Susan had never received treatment at any place called luxury. I spoke slowly, as if afraid I might drop something else. The air at the table shifted. I heard a few soft coughs. A distant relative bent down to adjust a napkin. Susan reached for my hand. Her fingers were thin and cold. That was when Megan set her wine glass down. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that I still remember it clearly. She didn't stand up. She didn't need to. Her voice was even and cold, like she was talking about an unnecessary expense. She said the wellness package had been canceled right after it was signed, that it wasn't necessary, that some luxuries shouldn't be wasted on people who don't know how to enjoy them. She said the last part more slowly, like it had been rehearsed. I didn't look at Megan right away. I looked at David. I waited for my son to say something, to interrupt, to look embarrassed, to correct her. But David just stood there, like he was trying to fit together two pieces that didn't belong. Susan lowered her head. I saw her shoulders shake, barely. I knew she was trying to stay calm. She always did. In 40 years of marriage, Susan had become very good at enduring in silence. Megan continued. No raised voice, no sarcasm. That was what made it heavier. She talked about waste, about the final years of life, about money needing to be spent in the right place. She didn't look at me while she spoke. She stared at the empty space between two wine glasses, like I was just a number on a spreadsheet. I listened without arguing, not because I agreed, but because I realized something was deeply wrong. Not just her words, her confidence, the way she spoke like she had been making these decisions for a long time. I turned to Susan and quietly asked if she was okay. She nodded, but I knew she was hurting, not just in her knees. The dinner went on, awkwardly. The main course arrived. The smell of grilled meat filled the room, but I had no appetite. I noticed Megan's parents laughing comfortably as if none of this involved them. They ordered more wine, more dessert. They talked about an upcoming vacation. Questions started forming in my head. If that resort ever existed, where was it? If the money had been paid, why didn't we know? And if it had been canceled, why did David know nothing about it I didn't ask during the dinner? I learned long ago that important questions shouldn't be asked in crowded places. But I knew this much. From the moment Megan set her glass down and said those words, a door had closed. The 40th anniversary dinner ended without a shared cake. When we stepped outside, the Chicago wind cut hard. Susan wore a thin coat. I wrapped my arm around her to shield her. David walked behind us, silent. I don't know what my son was thinking that night. But I know this. For me, that night wasn't just an insult. It was the first sign that something had been taken from us, quietly, over many years, without us ever knowing it. We didn't say much on the way home. Chicago at night was still bright, but the lights sliding past the window didn't make me feel any lighter. Susan sat beside me, both hands resting on her lap, shifting her position now and then to ease the pain. David drove eyes, fixed forward, jaw tight. The silence between the three of us wasn't open anger. It was the kind of silence that comes when familiar assumptions begin to crack. When we got back to the apartment, Susan went to rest early. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table. David stood there for a moment, then said he needed to clear up the resort situation. His voice wasn't raised, but I heard the confusion in it. I nodded. Not because I needed an explanation, but because I knew it was time for the truth to be called by its real name. We started with the smallest things. David opened his laptop and logged into the family accounts I had signed authorization for years ago. I remembered that afternoon clearly. Megan had brought over a thick folder, saying it was paperwork to make things easier when taking care of Mom and Dad later on. I skimmed it. Too many words. I was tired. I signed because I trusted my son. On the screen, the numbers lined up neatly. David scrolled, then stopped at a payment labeled Silver Oaks. The money had been transferred. Enough for a long-term package. He frowned. I realized then the issue wasn't whether it existed. It was how it had been used. David called the resort's customer service line and put it on speaker. The person on the other end confirmed the account was still active. The beneficiaries were listed as Robert and Susan. I looked at David. He looked at me. We both knew that didn't match reality. David asked for further verification. After a pause, the voice on the line said the two clients had been receiving services regularly for 3 years. There were medical records, signed confirmations, periodic check-in photos. I felt a chill run down my spine. Susan hadn't even left the state during that time. David asked them to send copies of the records. When the email arrived, he opened each file. I saw my name, Susan's date of birth, our old address. But the photos weren't us. They were 2 other people. I recognized them immediately. Megan's parents. The air in the kitchen grew thick. David said nothing for several minutes. He pulled out old documents, comparing signatures. The signature on file looked like mine, but it wasn't. It had been carefully traced. There was even a document stating that we were no longer capable of managing our own finances, and that the appointed representative was Megan. I stayed still, not because I was stunned, but because I was replaying every small detail I had ignored. Calls that never went through. Megan telling us to rest and not worry about paperwork. Insurance policies being canceled without clear explanations. David tapped his hand lightly on the table. Not hard, just enough to make a spoon tremble. He asked me why I never said anything. I told him I thought I should be able to endure it, that I knew he had his own family, his own pressures. I didn't want to become a burden. When I finished, I saw Susan standing in the doorway. She had heard everything. Susan didn't blame anyone. She only asked one quiet question. So all these years, they were living there under our names. I nodded. She let out a soft breath, like something heavy had finally been set down. David kept checking. He discovered our medical insurance beneficiaries had been changed. Every time Susan needed treatment, we had borrowed money because the insurance wouldn't pay. Everything lined up in a cold, precise way. This wasn't an accident. It was a chain of calculated decisions. David called Megan. No answer. He sent a message asking for an explanation. No reply. That silence was different from before. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was avoidance. I suggested we pause. I needed air. We stepped onto the narrow balcony, looking down at the familiar street. The night wind carried the smell of metal and passing cars. I thought about how my name had been used like a key, unlocking a life I had never lived. David said he would handle this. He spoke slowly, clearly, like he was reminding himself. I didn't ask for anything more. I only said I wanted everything returned to where it belonged. Nothing beyond that. Back at the table, David found one more detail. A mortgage file in my name tied to a retirement property he had once said was meant for us. The money from it had been transferred to a newly formed company connected to Megan's family. That company was in serious trouble. David sat down. For the first time that night, he lowered his head. I no longer saw the confident man in a tailored suit from the restaurant. I saw a child who had just realized he trusted the wrong people. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I didn't offer comfort. I only said that truth, even when it comes late, still has value. We decided that the next morning we would go straight to Silver Oaks. Not to cause a scene, but to see with our own eyes how my name had been used. That night I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't lost anymore. The pieces were finally visible, and when the truth begins to stand fully in front of you, you know the silence you lived with has come to an end. We left Chicago while it was still dark. David drove. I sat in the passenger seat. Susan stayed home. She said she wanted to wait for us to return before deciding anything. I understood. Some truths, if you're not ready to face them, are better seen first through someone else's eyes. The road to Silver Oaks was long and quiet. Streetlights grew sparse, replaced by neatly trimmed rows of trees. When the resort gates came into view, I felt a strange contrast. This place was built to offer peace, yet it stood on a foundation of substitution. David gave my name to the front desk. The young woman smiled, professionally nodded, and said that the couple were having breakfast in the main building. The way she said those words made it feel like my name was being spoken, but not meant for me. We followed a stone path past a still lake. The air was clean, nothing like the metallic smell of the city. I wondered who for the past 3 years had been waking up here under my name. The dining room was wide sunlight pouring through glass walls. I saw them immediately. Megan's parents sat at a table near the window trays of food neatly arranged in front of them. They laughed easily, like this was just another familiar morning. What stopped me wasn't the scene. It was the jacket on the man's shoulders. I recognized it instantly. The jacket I had worn for years, the one that had seen long shifts and cold nights. I hadn't been able to find it for a long time. Now it was here, on someone else's shoulders, in warm sunlight. David stepped forward. He introduced himself and asked to talk. Megan's parents looked up surprised for a brief moment, then calm again. They invited us to sit like old guests returning. I didn't sit. I stood there looking at the jacket and asked where it came from. The man smiled lightly and said it was a gift, that it fit the setting. The way he said it told me something. To them, anything could be used if it was convenient. David placed the documents on the table. He spoke about names, about signatures, about services that had been used. No raised voice, no threats, just questions that needed answers. Megan's parents listened occasionally, glancing at each other. Then the woman said they had only followed the arrangement, that everything was legal. I felt a hollow space open inside me. Legal sometimes is just a thin layer of paper covering the truth. I asked if they knew Susan had borrowed money for medical treatment. The woman stayed silent. The man shrugged and said it wasn't their concern. That sentence didn't make me angry. It made me clear-headed. I realized that to them, my name was nothing more than an access card. David asked to see the resort manager. The conversation moved to a private room. The manager reviewed the files, compared photos. The early professionalism slowly turned into caution. I didn't need to hear everything. I only watched as they began documenting every detail. While we waited, David received another call. He listened in silence, then hung up. He said the company tied to Megan's family had just filed for dissolution. The money from the retirement property had been used to keep it afloat during its final months. Everything connected in a way that couldn't be denied. Not a single mistake. A series of decisions, built on the assumption that we would never speak up. Megan's parents grew irritated. They talked about privacy, about inconvenience. I looked at them and said, only one thing, that my name was not an empty space for someone else to fill. The manager returned and said they needed to suspend services until everything was clarified. His tone was polite, but I understood what it meant. Access cards were collected, privileges closed, one by one. We left Silver Oaks when the sun was already high. I looked back once. not out of regret, but to remember this feeling, standing in front of a place that should have been mine, yet never truly was. On the drive back, David didn't talk much. He focused on the road. I knew he was thinking about his family, about the trust he had placed in certain decisions. I didn't blame him. I told him that sometimes trust is taken advantage of, not because we're weak, but because we're kind. As the city came back into view, my heartbeat felt steadier. The truth had stepped into the light. And even without a final resolution, I knew this. From the moment we walked into Silver Oaks this morning, something had changed. Not there, but in how we now see ourselves and the name that had been misused for so long. We didn't go straight home after leaving Silver Oaks. David turned onto another road and said he had an appointment with a lawyer from the fund he had worked with for years. I didn't ask questions. I understood. Once the truth is out, the next step is no longer emotion. It's responsibility. The law office was in a glass building, quiet and cold. I sat across from a middle-aged man with a thick stack of files in front of him. He listened as David explained, nodding at times, taking notes at others. I didn't interrupt. I just looked at the papers with my name on them. The copied signature. The line stating, I was no longer competent. The feeling was like someone closing a door right in front of me, while I was still standing there. The lawyer spoke slowly and clearly. What had happened was not a misunderstanding. It was a misuse of identity and of authority that had been given. He said the first priority was to protect Susan and me from any remaining obligations. I nodded. I didn't need heavy words. I just needed everything to stop. David signed a series of documents. My son didn't hesitate anymore. I realized that in just a few short days he had been forced to grow up in a way no one ever wants to. As we stepped outside, David's phone vibrated. This time, it was Megan. He put the call on speaker. Her voice came through, no longer calm like it had been at the dinner. She asked what was happening at Silver Oaks. David said everything was being reviewed. Megan went quiet for a few seconds. Then her tone hardened. She said if David kept going, this family would fall apart. She mentioned the child, said there were trips already planned. I felt my chest grow heavy. Susan didn't know about this call yet. I thought of her, of the evenings. She counted pills one by one. I didn't want her to carry any more worry. David didn't answer right away. He looked at me. I knew he was standing between two sides. I gave a small nod, not to push him, but to say there are limits that shouldn't be crossed. David said he wanted everything to be transparent. No raised voice, no threats. Megan gave a short laugh and said she had only done what was necessary. The call ended in a long silence. That afternoon we worked with the relevant offices. No shouting, no scenes, just conversations, copies sent, questions asked. I sat beside David, signing new documents. My hand was a little tired, but my mind was clear. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was taking my voice back. Susan called me as evening settled in. She asked if we were okay. I told her things were being handled. I didn't go into details. I knew she needed reassurance more than information. A few days later, Megan came to meet us. No luxury restaurant this time, just a small office. She talked a lot, about pressure, about bad decisions, about how things had gone too far. I listened without reacting. I didn't need explanations anymore. When she said she could leave, take everything with her, if David didn't stop, I felt Susan gently take my hand. She had come with us this time. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I only said one sentence I had been carrying for a long time, that some things can be taken away, but dignity cannot, and that our silence over the years was never permission. The room went quiet. Megan looked at me, a hint of uncertainty for the first time. David said he would do whatever was necessary to protect his parents and his child. Nothing more, nothing less. The weeks that followed moved slowly. Services were shut down. Accounts were reviewed. Those who had used our names improperly were required to leave. No one spoke loudly about it, but I knew a chain of consequences had begun. When things finally settled, I sat in our familiar apartment looking out the window. Susan made tea and sat beside me. She said she felt lighter. I didn't know if it was because the pain had eased or because another burden had been set down. I've come to understand that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply doors closing where they should, and names being returned to the right people. And in that quiet, I knew this. We had crossed a line we had never dared to touch before. Things didn't end in a single day. After the necessary doors were closed, our lives entered another quiet phase. No more sudden shocks, just long decisions. I got used to signing papers in the morning, reading each line slowly, no longer rushing like before. Susan did the same. She began asking more questions, not out of suspicion, but because she wanted to understand. Silver Oaks, the place that once carried our names on paper, was eventually handled through the proper process. When everything was clear, David asked Susan and me what we wanted to do next. We could take it back, use it as it was originally intended. But I looked at Susan and already knew my answer. I told him I didn't need a place that was too quiet, too complete, if it reminded me of years taken away in silence. Susan nodded. She said she only needed enough to live without worry, and enough so people like us wouldn't have to bow their heads because of what they didn't know. We decided to sell Silver Oaks. Not in a hurry. Carefully, David helped us make a clear plan. Part of the money went to paying off old debts. Medical bills Susan had carried alone. The rest we used to set up a small fund for elderly people facing financial abuse. People who had signed papers without truly being explained what they meant. I didn't name the fund after myself. I named it after a simple word. Easy to remember. A reminder of what I once lacked. Clarity. We didn't make it big. No press. Just a small office, a helpline, and a few people who knew the work. But each case helped, each signature properly explained made me feel the years we lost weren't meaningless. David changed too. He didn't talk much about his decision, but he left his high-pressure job in Chicago. He said he wanted to be closer to us. I didn't ask why. Some things only become clear after you almost lose them. We moved to the suburbs. A small piece of land. A bright enough house. I planted a few vegetable beds. Susan tended to her flowers. In the mornings, she no longer had to count every step down the stairs. The pain was still there, but she didn't hide it anymore. We learned to speak up, slowly, like learning a new habit. Some afternoons, David sits with me on the porch. We don't talk about the past. We talk about the weather, about repairs, about dinner. I've realized the kind of wealth I once imagined doesn't live in luxury places or big contracts. It lives in being able to sit still, without fearing that one unexpected call might take something away. Susan sometimes asks if I regret anything. I think for a moment, then tell her I regret the years of silence, not what we lost. Without those years, I might never have understood the value of standing up at the right time. Our small fund slowly found people. Some only needed an explanation. Some needed someone to sit beside them while they signed. I don't see myself as a rescuer. I'm just someone who's been there and doesn't want others to repeat it. One evening, Susan brought out an old stack of papers. Bills. My night shift logs. She asked if I wanted to keep them. I told her to store them away. Not to forget, but to remember we made it through. Our story doesn't end with applause. No bright moment. It ends with quiet mornings, full meals, and the certainty that our names now sit where they belong. If there's one thing I'd say again, it's this. A son's wealth isn't shown in the gift he announces in front of a crowd. It's in whether he sees his parents' hands. Life may take a few years from you in silence, but if you're patient enough to stand upright, it will give you back a calmer chapter. Thank you for spending time with my story. If it made you pause and think, please subscribe, like, and share, so stories like this can reach more families. Sometimes what older people need most isn't a grand gift, but to be heard and respected. Money can be lost. Identity can be misused. But dignity and family only survive when we choose to protect them in time. Thank you for staying until the very end. I wish you and your family enough understanding, so you won't have to regret the things that could have been said sooner.